The afternoon sun, usually a welcome golden wash across my living room, felt like a harsh spotlight. When I pushed open the front door of my modest suburban home that day, I stepped not into the quiet sanctuary I craved, but into a simmering cauldron of fury. There, in the center of the room, stood my daughter, Elara Miller, her eyes blazing with an intensity that promised a storm. Her arms were tightly crossed over her chest, her face a canvas of pure, unadulterated distress. Beside her, Marcus Kane, my son-in-law, paced the worn Persian rug like a predator in a cage. His mobile phone was clutched in one hand, and the veins in his neck pulsed, stark against his flushed skin, a testament to his barely contained rage. They didn't even allow me the courtesy of closing the door behind me, the cool afternoon breeze still stirring the curtains. "Have you lost your mind?" Elara shrieked, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. She marched toward me, each furious stride shaking the floorboards beneath her sleek, expensive ankle boots. Marcus almost had a heart attack at the ATM. Her words ricocheted off the walls, laced with a venom I knew intimately, a flavor I'd tasted countless times. Yet this time, strangely, it didn't sting with the same soul-crushing intensity. Something within me had hardened, forming a new, resilient layer. Marcus stepped closer, his phone thrust aggressively in front of my face, its screen displaying a chilling message: insufficient funds. "Where is the money, Eleanor?" he roared, his voice a desperate, guttural sound, as if some vital organ had been ripped from him. "What did you do? The card is empty. There's not a single dollar." His outrage was palpable, deeply rooted in the belief that this money was rightfully his, a resource to be tapped at will. But that money was mine, my social security. The tangible reward for 42 years spent toiling at the textile mill, rising before dawn, sacrificing my back, my knees, my youth. 42 years of lint-filled air and the ceaseless hum of machinery. It was the legacy of my unwavering resilience, not a communal fund for their lavish whims. I placed my purse on the antique entry table, the simple action executed with a calmness that genuinely surprised even myself. My hands, usually prone to a slight tremor these days, were steady. I met their furious gazes, first Elara's, then Marcus's, with an unwavering stare. "I changed my bank information," I stated, my voice firm, clear, cutting through the agitated air. "Now my social security goes to a new card, one that only I control." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that follows a sudden, violent crash, when the world holds its breath, waiting for the echo to fade. Ilara's mouth fell open, but no sound escaped. Marcus froze mid-pace, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions, cycling from bright crimson to a ghostly white, his furious energy dissipating into stunned disbelief. It was as if time itself had momentarily ceased, that fragile second before the inevitable explosion. An explosion we all felt coming, yet none could stop. "What? What did you say?" Elara finally stammered, her hand pressed to her chest as if to quell a sudden, violent palpitation. "Mom, you can't do that. We depend on that money. We have expenses. We have debts to pay." Her voice was a desperate whimper, a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar, feigning injury. "Debts?" I repeated the word, allowing it to hang in the air, cold and sharp. Something inside me, a core of long-suffering patience, hardened further, like steel forged in fire. "Are you talking about Marcus's new truck, or the vacation to Mykonos last month? Or perhaps that giant 70-inch television you bought the week before?" My gaze was unwavering, each word a direct hit. Marcus took a step forward, his index finger pointed at me, accusing and aggressive. "You live in our house. You eat our food. It's the least you can do to contribute." His words were spat out, loaded with a contempt he no longer bothered to disguise. The sheer audacity of his statement was breathtaking. A bitter, almost hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, threatening to escape. Our house. How strange that he called it that now, when the property papers still bore my deceased husband, Arthur's name and mine. This house, a sanctuary we had built with so much effort, brick by painstaking brick, sacrifice after hard-won sacrifice, was now, in my son-in-law's warped vocabulary, their house. "This is my house, Marcus," I said, a new resonance in my voice, a tone I barely recognized as my own. Too firm, too assured, too utterly unapologetic. "You came to live here 3 years ago, remember? When you lost your apartment because you couldn't pay the rent." Elara let out a choked cry, a raw, wounded sound, as if I had physically struck her. "I can't believe you're talking to me like this. I'm your daughter, your only daughter. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but I recognized their true nature. They were tears of pure rage, not sadness. I had seen them countless times when she hadn't gotten her way, an emotional weapon honed over decades. "Everything you've done for me," I echoed, the words emerging colder than I had intended. "Tell me, Elara, what exactly have you done for me?" she stammered, frantically searching for arguments in the air, her usual glibness failing her. We give you a roof. We take care of you. You take care of me," I interrupted, feeling decades of suppressed silence shattering inside me, like a dam finally bursting. The torrent of unspoken grievances surged forth. "You take care of me when you wake me up at 6 in the morning to make breakfast, when I have to wash your clothes, iron Marcus's bespoke shirts, clean the bathroom you leave filthy. That's taking care of me." Marcus punched the wall with his fist, a dull thud that sent a tremor through the old plaster. My wedding photo, a cherished relic that had hung there for 45 years, swayed precariously. "You're ungrateful, a selfish old woman. Without us, you'd be rotting in some rundown nursing home." His words should have cut me. 6 months ago, they would have utterly destroyed me, reduced me to a weeping heap of despair. But today, after what I had endured, the endless humiliations I had swallowed in silence, the countless nights spent crying into my pillow in my cramped room, while they laughed raucously in the living room, casually spending my $1,500 monthly on their latest whims. Those words bounced off me, causing not a single flicker of pain. They were mere echoes of a past self I was determined to leave behind. "Maybe you're right," I said, picking up my purse again, my grip surprisingly steady. "Maybe I am a selfish old woman. But this selfish old woman just got her freedom back." Elara sank onto the sofa, the very sofa I had paid for when their worn-out one had finally collapsed. Her hands trembled as she covered her face, her carefully applied makeup smudging. "You can't do this to us, Mum. Please. Marcus has medical treatments. We have financial commitments. You're going to ruin us." "I'm going to ruin you," I repeated slowly, letting each word settle in the thick, charged air of the living room. "Isn't that ironic? For 3 years you've lived off my social security. Every dollar I earned with my sweat and hard work. And now that I decide that money should be mine again, I'm the one who's ruining you." Marcus approached again, but this time there was something new in his eyes. It wasn't just raw rage anymore. It was fear. A primal, chilling fear of losing his income source, his personal ATM that had functioned so reliably, so silently, for so long without protest. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable," he said, attempting to soften his tone, though a tremor of desperation still undercut his voice. "We can come to an agreement. You don't have to do this. So drastic." I looked at this man who had entered my family 7 years ago, all charm and promises to take care of my daughter. The same man who now saw me only as a withered resource, a well to be drained until nothing was left. He was a parasite, and I was finally ready to cut him loose. "The only agreement we're going to have," I said, turning and walking deliberately toward the stairs leading to my room, "is that starting today, my money is only mine. And if that bothers you, well, the door is open. You know where it is." I left them there, stranded in the middle of the living room, their mouths agape, their carefully constructed plans crumbling around them like a house of cards. I climbed each step, feeling an enormous, oppressive weight lift from my shoulders, a tangible burden of 3 years of servitude and silence. It had taken me 69 years to learn this profound lesson, that love cannot be bought, that real family doesn't exploit you, and that it is never, ever too late to reclaim your dignity. Behind me, I heard Ilara's heartbroken sobs, a sound that once would have shattered me, and Marcus's muffled curses. But for the first time in 3 long years, those sounds no longer broke my heart. They only served as a stark reminder of why I had made the most important decision of my life that morning, when I had walked into the bank and uttered the simple words that would change everything. "I want to change my bank information. I need a new card, one that no one else can touch." But it all began 3 years ago, at the funeral of my beloved husband, Arthur. I remember the cloying scent of white carnations, a floral perfume that mingled unpleasantly with the aroma of strong coffee the neighbours had brewed for the attendees. I remember Ilara's hands, clutching mine with a ferocity that felt both comforting and desperate, as I watched Arthur's polished oak casket descend into the cold earth. With it went 45 years of my life, 45 years of shared laughter, of silent breakfasts over the morning paper, of silly arguments that always ended in sweet reconciliations, of a companionship so deep it felt woven into the fabric of my very being. Arthur had died of a massive heart attack on a Tuesday morning. He was out in the garden, watering his prize-winning roses, the ones he tended with such devotion, when he simply collapsed. By the time the ambulance arrived, its siren a mournful wail in the quiet street, it was already too late. The doctor, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, told me he hadn't suffered, that it had been instantaneous. But I suffered. God, how I suffered. The grief was a physical entity, a crushing weight that stole my breath and clarity. The first months in that empty house were a silent hell. Every corner screamed his absence. His chipped coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, his worn slippers by the bed, his toothbrush, which I couldn't bring myself to throw away until 6 agonizing months later. I would wake in the pre-dawn hours, expecting to find him in the kitchen, engrossed in the morning newspaper, and the brutal reality would hit me each time, as fresh and shocking as if it were the first. Ilara came to visit me often at first. "Mum, you can't stay here alone," she would say, sitting on the living room sofa where Arthur and I had watched countless movies, our hands intertwined. "Come live with us for a while, just until you recover." Marcus would nod beside her, offering a smile that back then had seemed genuine to me, brimming with filial concern. He even patted my shoulder, a gesture I mistook for kindness. I resisted for weeks. This house was my sanctuary, the place where I had raised Ilara, where every wall held a cherished memory, every scuff mark a story. It was the last tangible connection to Arthur, but the loneliness weighed like lead in my bones, a constant, dull ache. The nights grew endless, stretching into an eternity of silent hours. The silence itself was so thick, so pervasive, I felt I could reach out and touch it, a suffocating blanket. So finally, I accepted. "Just for a while," I told them, my voice thin and reedy, "until I learn to be alone again." I packed 2 modest suitcases with the essentials: clothes, a few precious photos, the soft green knitted shawl Arthur had given me for our 20th anniversary. I closed my front door with a knot of dread in my throat, promising myself I would be back soon. How naive I was. How utterly blind to the subtle machinations already at play. The initial months at Ilara and Marcus's place were bearable, almost pleasant. Ilara worked at a high-end downtown boutique, selling designer clothes to women much wealthier than herself. Marcus, supposedly, was diligently looking for a new job after being unceremoniously fired from the insurance company where he'd worked for years. He always had a plausible excuse for his lack of employment. The market was tough. The right opportunity hadn't presented itself. He was holding out for something worthy of his talents. I helped with the housework. I cooked their meals, wholesome, home-style dishes that reminded me of Arthur. I cleaned their perpetually messy house. It made me feel useful, necessary, a vital cog in the family machine. I genuinely believed I was contributing, earning my keep while my broken heart slowly, painfully began to mend. But things began to change, subtly at first, almost imperceptibly, like the slow creep of ivy up a wall. The first cracks appeared when Marcus approached me, a sheepish, charming smile plastered on his face. "Eleanor, I hate to ask, but could I borrow $200? There's this online course, a certification program, that would really boost my chances of getting a good job. I'll pay you back next month, I promise." He swore on his mother's grave. I handed him the money, a small sum from my meager savings dues. He never returned it. Then Ilara needed $300 to pay off a credit card debt. "It's an emergency, Mum. If I don't pay, they'll charge me sky-high interest. You know how those banks are." I didn't see that money back either. At first, I didn't mind. They were my family, my only family. If my money could help them navigate a rough patch, why not? Arthur always said that family came first, that money came and went, but blood ties were eternal. I believed those words as if they were gospel, an unwavering creed. One day, Marcus arrived home with a new proposal, his tone casual, almost conspiratorial. "Eleanor, I've been thinking. It would be so much easier if your Social Security went directly into our account. That way we can manage the household expenses better. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll take care of everything." He presented it as the most logical, most sensible arrangement in the world. Ilara supported the idea immediately, her face alight with what I now recognize as a predatory gleam. "It's true, Mum. It's much simpler that way. Besides, you're not good with numbers. Remember how Dad always took care of all the finances? We'll do the same. We'll take care of you." Their words, wrapped in a deceptive veneer of concern and love, or what I desperately clung to as love, sounded perfectly reasonable. Trusting, vulnerable, and still reeling from the loss of Arthur, I signed the papers at the bank without reading the fine print. Naively, I gave them complete access to my card. I handed over control of my $1,500 monthly without asking a single question. After all, I was living under their roof, eating their food, using their electricity. It was only fair, right? It was the right thing to do, to contribute to the family that was taking care of me. The transformation was gradual, so insidious that I didn't realize it until I was already thoroughly trapped. Marcus began treating me less like a mother-in-law and more like a live-in servant, his initial charm replaced by an entitled imperiousness. "Eleanor, breakfast is taking too long, I'm in a hurry." Or, "Eleanor, these shirts aren't ironed well. Do them again, properly this time." His favorite complaint, delivered with a sneer, was always, "Eleanor, you cleaned the bathroom poorly. There are still smudges on the mirror. Are you even trying?" Ilara, my own daughter, slowly stopped asking me how I was coping with the gnawing grief, how my day had been. Conversations about my feelings, my well-being, my grieving process simply evaporated, replaced by a constant stream of demands. Now we only talked about chores I needed to do, groceries I needed to fetch, meals I had to prepare. I had become a shadow in that house, a useful, silent ghost who cooked, cleaned, and paid their bills without complaint. On weekends, they would go out to expensive restaurants in the city's fashionable districts, never inviting me. "Those places are too noisy, Mum. At your age, you need your rest," Alara would say, dismissively, while putting on a coral-coloured designer dress that I knew, with a sickening certainty, had cost at least $300. Dollars that had originated from my social security. I stayed home, eating their lukewarm leftovers, watching insipid television in the small, dimly lit room they had assigned me in the back of the house, feeling utterly alone, utterly forgotten. One day, I stumbled upon a forgotten receipt on the kitchen table, carelessly discarded. It was from a high-end jewelry store in the most exclusive mall in the city. Marcus had bought Ilara a delicate gold necklace, costing a staggering $1,200. My heart sank, a heavy stone in my chest. While I wore the same worn-out clothes from years ago, mended and patched, while I denied myself basic treats like a new book from the bookstore or a pastry from my favorite local bakery, they were indulging in lavish luxuries with my money. I started paying more attention. The frequent nights out, the endless stream of new designer clothes that mysteriously appeared in their closets every week, the gleaming sports car Marcus bought with his savings, despite not having worked a single day in 2 years. It all began to fit together, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. My social security wasn't being used for essential household expenses, as they had claimed. It was funding a lavish, unsustainable lifestyle they couldn't possibly afford on their own. I tried to talk to Alara one evening while we were, ironically, washing dishes together. "Honey," I began, my voice barely a whisper, my hands trembling as I rinsed a plate. "I've been thinking that maybe I should go back to my house. Enough time has passed since your dad died. I need to learn to live alone again." The words were an attempt, a tentative reach for my lost autonomy. She looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, so utterly different from the warm, loving eyes of the child I had raised. "Go back to your house? Mum, don't be silly. That house is neglected, probably falling apart. Besides, how are you going to live alone at your age? What if you fall? What if you get sick? You're safe here. You're cared for here." But there was no love in her voice, only a chilling, strategic calculation. I was an asset, not a mother. That night, I cried in my small, lonely room, clutching a pillow to my face to muffle the desperate sobs. I missed Arthur with an intensity that tore me in two. He never would have allowed this. He would have defended me, protected me fiercely. But Arthur was dead, buried under cold ground, and I was alone, facing a stark, ugly reality I no longer wished to accept. My own daughter, the baby I had nursed, the child whose scraped knees I had patched up after every fall, the teenager whose tears I had dried after every heartbreak, was using me. She was squeezing me like an inexhaustible resource, a source of money with no feelings, no dignity, no value beyond what I could provide economically. But even then, I still didn't have the courage to act. I still clung to the desperate hope that things would improve, that it was just a difficult, temporary phase, that the deep, unconditional love we once shared would somehow miraculously resurface. I lied to myself every morning when I woke, every night when I went to bed. I swallowed the humiliation, the bitterness, because the alternative was accepting that I had lost not only my husband, but also my daughter. Months passed, and the situation only worsened. Marcus didn't even pretend to look for a job anymore. He would wake up at noon, eat the elaborate breakfast I prepared, without offering even a perfunctory thank you, and spend the rest of the day sprawled on the sofa, watching endless sports or playing violent video games. Ilara would come home from work, and instead of helping me with dinner or engaging in conversation, she would shut herself in her room to talk on the phone with her friends about their next lavish vacation. I was merely a shadow, a convenient fixture in their self-indulgent world. One Friday night, while I was meticulously cleaning the kitchen after they had gone out to an expensive dinner, I found a discarded bank statement crumpled and thrown carelessly in the trash can. My hands trembling, I retrieved it and unfolded it under the harsh lamplight. My eyes scanned the lines of expenses, a horrifying litany of their excesses. Exclusive restaurants, trendy bars, high-end clothing stores, luxury spas, exclusive gyms. In a single month, they had spent $2,800. My social security was $1,500. The remaining $1,300 came from a labyrinth of credit cards I didn't even know existed, cards that were being paid, or rather, attempted to be paid, with my money from the following month. I sank into a kitchen chair, feeling the world spin around me. They were plunging deeper and deeper into debt, living a lifestyle far beyond their means, and using my social security as a bottomless pit to cover their insatiable excesses. How much longer could this precarious situation last? What would happen when I could no longer cover their ever-growing debts? Would they simply throw me out onto the street like an old, useless rag, discarded once its purpose was served? The thought sent a chill down my spine. That night, lying in my narrow bed, staring at the cracked, cream-colored ceiling of my small room, I made a decision. A firm, unshakable resolve. I needed to know exactly what was happening with my money. I needed to understand the full, horrifying magnitude of the problem before I could even contemplate doing anything about it. And above all, I needed to recover at least a sliver of the control I had lost over my own life, over my own destiny. The next morning, I rose before dawn, as was my ingrained habit. I made coffee, meticulously set the breakfast table, cooked scrambled eggs and toast, all on autopilot while my mind worked feverishly on a plan. I needed information. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to see with my own eyes the extent of the financial theft they were committing against me. When Ilara and Marcus finally stirred and came down for breakfast, I had already formulated my strategy. "I need to go to the bank today," I announced casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "I have to sort out some matters regarding your father's account that I left pending." I carefully maintained a neutral expression, feigning a sudden memory. Marcus looked up from his phone, an instant flash of alarm in his eyes, quickly masked. "The bank? Why do you need to go to the bank, Eleanor? If you need something, I can go for you." His tone was too anxious, too controlling, the veneer of concern barely concealing his underlying suspicion. "They are personal matters," I replied firmly, surprising myself with the unwavering conviction in my voice. "Documents I need to sign, things about the inheritance." I lied without batting an eye, and the lie came so naturally, so smoothly that it almost scared me. This newfound deception was a stark contrast to my usual honesty. Ilara exchanged a worried glance with Marcus. "Mum, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go out alone. Let me go with you. I get off work at 3. We can go together." But I knew, with a certainty born of bitter experience, that if she came with me, I would never get the answers I so desperately needed. They would run interference, distract, manipulate. "I'll go alone," I said, and there was something new in my voice, a quiet authority that made them both draw back slightly. 10 o'clock this morning. Don't worry about me." I grabbed my purse and left the house before they could protest further, before their carefully constructed arguments could materialize. The bank was a 20-minute bus ride away. During the journey, my heart pounded so hard against my ribs, I was certain all the other passengers could hear it. What was I going to discover? Did I truly want to know the unvarnished truth? But it was too late to turn back. I had crossed an invisible line that morning, a point of no return. The old, compliant Eleanor had taken a decisive step forward. At the bank, a young, impeccably dressed executive named Chloe Davies served me with a professional yet kind smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller. How can I help you today?" Her eyes were warm, non-judgmental, and that unexpected kindness gave me the fragile courage I needed. "I need to see all the transactions on my account for the last 3 years," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a thin thread of sound. "All the deposits and all the withdrawals. I want a complete, detailed statement." Chloe nodded, her expression shifting slightly, a flicker of understanding passing through her eyes. She began typing diligently on her computer. After a few minutes, the printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of dense financial information. When it finally finished, there was a stack of nearly 50 pages of paper in front of me, a weighty testament to my lost years. "Do you want to review it here, or would you prefer to take it home?" she asked, her voice gentle, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "I'll review it here," I replied, taking the thick stack with hands that, remarkably, barely trembled. I found a quiet chair in the waiting area, tucked away from the main bustle, and began to read. And with every page I turned, every stark number that stared back at me, I felt my heart growing smaller, harder, colder, encased in an icy shell of betrayal. The numbers didn't lie. In 3 years, they had spent more than $60,000 of my Social Security. $60,000. The money I had earned with 42 years of back-breaking work, rising before the sun, sacrificing my health, my knees that now creaked with every hesitant step, my back that ached every night. I saw $500 withdrawals at high-end electronics stores, $800 at luxury restaurants, $1,000 at a jewelry store, $2,000 at an exotic travel agency. Purchases and more purchases, luxuries and more luxuries, all paid for with my effort, my pain, my dignity. But the worst wasn't the large, glaring expenses. The worst were the insidious small details that truly revealed the true, petty nature of their betrayal. $20 withdrawals at trendy bars at 2 in the morning, $50 at beauty salons every week for Ilara's manicures and pedicures, $150 on new clothes every month. While I wore the same 3 worn, faded dresses I had brought from my own home, while I refused to buy much-needed medication for my worsening arthritis because I didn't want to be a burden, they were flaunting new clothes and perfect manicures, living a life of utter disregard for my well-being. Chloe approached after almost an hour, a look of genuine concern etched on her face. "Are you all right, Mrs. Miller? Can I get you a glass of water?" It was then I realized that tears were silently rolling down my cheeks, hot and unwelcome, without me even noticing. "I'm fine," I lied, wiping the tears away with the back of my hand, a gesture that felt as old as time. I need to know something. Is it possible to change my bank information? To have my Social Security deposit into a new account? A card that only I have access to?" Chloe's eyes lit up with understanding. She had seen this scenario before. I knew it by the empathetic way she nodded. "Of course it's possible, Ma'am, and I can help you right now if you wish. I just need to see your ID and sign some forms." My hand moved toward my purse almost on instinct, a sudden surge of adrenaline coursing through me. "Yes," I said, and my voice, though still slightly shaky, sounded firmer than I felt. "Yes, I want to do it now. I want a new account, a new card, something only I can touch." Chloe worked quickly, efficiently, and with a quiet compassion that warmed my chilled heart. She explained every step of the process, every form I signed. In less than an hour, I had a completely new account with a new debit card that would arrive at my address in 5 business days. My Social Security for the next month would deposit directly into this new, secure account, A place where Elara and Marcus couldn't reach it, couldn't plunder it. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Chloe asked when we finished, her gaze holding a mixture of admiration and sadness, as if she understood exactly the weight of the decision I had just made. "Yes," I said, surprising myself again with my newfound assertiveness. "I want extra copies of these bank statements. 3 complete sets, please." If I was going to do this, if I was going to reclaim my life, I needed to be prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would follow. I needed undeniable proof. I left the bank with my purse feeling heavier, carrying not only the stack of incriminating papers, but also a new, fierce determination. The sun outside seemed to shine brighter than when I had entered. Or perhaps it was just that I could see it better now, the fog of my despair finally lifting. For 3 years, I had lived in a suffocating haze of pain and manipulation, but that fog was now dissipating, revealing an ugly but ultimately liberating truth. On the bus ride back, I hugged my purse tightly to my chest and looked out the window. We passed the small artisanal bakery where Arthur used to buy me sweet rolls on Sundays. We passed the neighborhood park where Elara had learned to ride her bicycle, her scraped knees a familiar sight. We passed the quaint church where Arthur and I had been married 45 years ago. All those precious memories, all those beautiful recollections. And yet here I was, a 69-year-old woman, having to protect myself from my own daughter, from the child I had nurtured and loved above all else. When I arrived home, Elara was still at work, and Marcus was sprawled on the sofa, snoring softly, the television tuned to some mindless football game. I silently went up to my room and carefully hid the stack of papers at the bottom of my suitcase, beneath my oldest underwear and socks. No one would think to look there. No one would suspect that I, the foolish old woman who let herself be manipulated, would possess the cunning to hide such damning evidence. I sat on my bed and looked around my small room, the peeling, cream-coloured walls, the single window that faced the dreary back alley, the tiny closet where my few clothes barely fit. This was not a room for a beloved guest, a cherished mother. It was a servant's quarters, a place to keep the employee who cooked, cleaned, and paid the bills, out of sight and out of mind. But in 5 days, when my new card arrived, everything would change. In 5 days, I would begin to recover not only my money, but something infinitely more valuable: my dignity, my self-worth, my inherent right to exist as something more than a mere source of income for people who had long forgotten what it truly meant to love. The next 5 days were the longest of my life, each hour stretching into an eternity of anticipation. Every morning I woke with a nervous flutter in my stomach, wondering if that would be the day the card arrived. Every time I heard the distinct rustle of the mail carrier at the mailbox, my heart leapt into my throat. But I had to act normal, to maintain the facade, to not raise any suspicions. I had to continue being the submissive, obedient Eleanor they expected, the docile ATM they relied on. Marcus, ever the observant hawk when it came to his comfort, noticed something different about me on the 3rd day. I was serving dinner when he looked up from his plate, his eyes narrowed, scrutinizing. "You've been weird lately, Eleanor. Is something wrong?" His tone was accusatory, as if I had no right to possess independent thoughts or feelings. "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the plate of roasted chicken I was serving. "Just a little tired, old age." I let my shoulders slump a little more, allowed my voice to sound weaker, more fragile. It was a role I had played for 3 years, a performance I had perfected. A few more days of this charade wouldn't make a difference. Elara came home that night with a fresh batch of shopping bags again. I recognized the distinct logos of the expensive stores at the mall, stores I could only dream of entering. "Mum, I need you to iron this lavender dress for tomorrow. I have an important dinner with friends," she said, dropping the bags carelessly in my room, as if it were the most natural, expected request in the world. I looked at that dress, a flimsy wisp of silk that had probably cost $200 of my Social Security, and something inside me broke definitively. A fragile wire snapped, a last shred of patience frayed beyond repair. "Why don't you iron it yourself?" The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, a rebellious whisper. Elara spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "What did you say?" Her voice had a dangerous edge, the same tone she had used as a teenager when she hadn't gotten what she wanted, a tone that promised a tantrum. "Nothing," I rushed to say, hating myself for my momentary cowardice, but knowing, deep down, that I had to wait. Only 2 more days until the card arrived. 2 more days, and I could stop pretending, could drop the mask of the meek, compliant mother. "I'll iron it after I wash the dishes." The 4th day was when I almost ruined everything. I was cleaning Elara and Marcus's bedroom, a weekly chore I performed, despite the gnawing ache in my back, when I noticed an open envelope on their nightstand. It was a statement from a credit card I didn't even know existed. Curiosity, a powerful, dangerous force, overcame my caution, and I pulled the statement from the envelope. The balance was $15,000. $15,000 of debt on a card I had never seen, never approved. My hands trembled as I scanned the itemized charges: more restaurants, more travel, more expensive clothes, more glittering jewelry. A month-long beach vacation they had taken last summer while I stayed home alone, the massive 70-inch television in the living room, the sleek new dining room furniture. Everything had been bought on credit. And I knew exactly who was paying those credit bills every month, or rather, trying to pay them, because it was clearly not enough. They were sinking deeper and deeper into a quicksand of debt, using my Social Security as a futile attempt to plug the holes of their financial irresponsibility. And when my money was no longer enough, what then? Would they kick me out onto the street? Would they force me to sell my beloved house, my sanctuary, to pay for their endless whims? I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and familiar, and quickly, silently, shoved the envelope back into its original position. Marcus entered the room and found me dusting the nightstand, my hands visibly trembling, a fine sheen of sweat on my forehead. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion, his eyes narrowed to slits. "Cleaning," I replied, my voice a strained whisper, refusing to meet his gaze. "Like every Thursday." He stood in the doorway for a long, uncomfortable moment, his presence radiating distrust, before grunting something unintelligible and finally leaving. I left that room with my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst, nearly fainting from the sheer terror of almost being discovered. It had been close. Too close. The 5th day. Finally. The card arrived. I heard the mail carrier drop the mail in the box around 11 in the morning. Elara was at work, and Marcus had gone out to meet some friends, probably to spend more money they didn't have. I was gloriously, terrifyingly alone. I ran to the door with an energy I hadn't felt in years, a burst of adrenaline propelling me forward. My hand was trembling so violently I could barely open the mailbox. There it was, nestled among the bills and junk mail, an official bank envelope with my name. Only my name. Not Elara's, not Marcus's. Mine. I opened it with clumsy, eager fingers and pulled out the new card. It was silver, gleaming under the sunlight, a promise of freedom in my trembling hands. My name was elegantly engraved, Eleanor Miller. It wasn't just a card, it was a key to a new life, a new beginning. I slipped the envelope into my purse and went back inside the house. I had to activate the card, change the PIN, make sure everything worked correctly. I called the number in the instructions, my voice steady now, and followed every step meticulously. When the automated voice confirmed that my card was active and that my next Social Security deposit would arrive in 2 days, I felt a wave of relief so intense, so profound, that I had to sit down, my knees suddenly weak. 2 days. In 2 days, when Marcus tried to withdraw money from the ATM, as he always did on the first of the month, there would be nothing. The account would be empty. And then, the confrontation I had been postponing, fearing, for 3 agonizing years, would finally come. That night, Ilara came home in a particularly bad mood. She had had a difficult day at the boutique, she said, although I suspected it had more to do with a customer returning something expensive she had bought with my money. "Mum, what's for dinner?" she asked, without even a perfunctory greeting, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Roast chicken and mashed potatoes," I replied, placing the plates on the table, as I did every Thursday night, a dutiful servant. Marcus arrived shortly after, smelling faintly of beer, his eyes a little glassy. He sat down at the table without washing his hands and began serving himself without waiting for me to sit down. "This chicken is dry," he complained, after the first bite, his mouth full. "Can't you cook something decent for once?" Something inside me hardened, solidified into an unyielding core. I looked at that plate of food I had prepared with ingredients bought with my money, on a stove I had paid for, in a house that was, unequivocally, mine. "If you don't like it," I said, in a voice I barely recognized as my own, clear and unwavering, "you can cook it yourself tomorrow." The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Ilara stopped chewing, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth, and stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Marcus dropped his fork with a metallic clang against the plate, the sound echoing loudly in the sudden void. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low, a coiled threat. "What you heard," I replied, standing up slowly from the table, my gaze meeting his defiantly. "I'm tired. I'm going to my room." And I left, walking away from their stunned, disbelieving faces, feeling their fixed stares burning into my back. In my room, I sat on the bed and took the new card out of my purse. I held it under the lamplight and saw my distorted reflection on its silver surface. This woman in the reflection, with her honestly earned wrinkles and silvering hair, with her hands stained from years of relentless work, this woman was me. And this woman had just taken the first real, undeniable step toward her freedom. I hid the card in the same place where I had hidden the bank statements, a small act of defiance. Tomorrow would be Saturday, the day after tomorrow, Sunday. And on Monday, the first of the month, when my Social Security deposited into the new account and not the old one, my real battle would begin. But this time, I wouldn't be fighting empty-handed. This time, I would have something they had underestimated for far too long, my own indomitable will to survive. I went to bed that night with a potent mixture of fear and anticipation swirling within me. I knew what was coming would be ugly, painful, probably devastating. But I also knew there was no other option. I had reached the end of a long, tortuous road, and the only possible direction was forward, toward the light, toward freedom, even if the price was losing the only people I had left in this world. Because in the end, what value did those people have if they only saw me as a means to finance their lives? What kind of love was that, which only existed as long as the money flowed freely from my purse? The time had come to find out if there was anything real left beneath all that greed, or if I had lost my daughter much earlier than I wanted to admit. The weekend passed in a strange, brittle tension, the air thick with unspoken resentment. Ilara and Marcus barely spoke to me. They ate their meals in strained silence when I was present, or more often, they simply shut themselves in their room with takeout food they had bought. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a minefield where any sudden movement, any misplaced word, could detonate an explosion. But I had made a decision. A line had been drawn, and I wasn't going to back down. For the first time in 3 years, I bought food only for myself. I meticulously portioned my groceries and placed them on a separate shelf in the refrigerator, clearly marked with a small, defiant note that simply read, Eleanor. I felt ridiculous doing it, like a distrustful roommate rather than the owner of the house, but it was a necessary symbolic act. I needed to establish boundaries, clear and unambiguous, boundaries that should have existed from the very beginning. On the 3rd day after my quiet rebellion, I heard Ilara crying in her room, muffled sobs escaping through the closed door. My deeply ingrained motherly instinct surged, urging me to go up, to comfort her, to fix things as I had always done, to smooth over the rough edges. But I forced myself to stay seated in the kitchen, slowly sipping my herbal tea, reminding myself that comforting her now would be surrendering. It would be a retreat, a return to the same old, toxic pattern where I gave in, and they, inevitably, won. Marcus tried a different tactic on the 4th day. He came into the kitchen where I was preparing my solitary lunch and sat down at the table, adopting a contrite, almost mournful expression. Eleanor, we need to talk, he said, his tone carefully calibrated to sound conciliatory, reasonable. Talk, I replied, without stopping my methodical cutting of vegetables for my salad, my knife tapping rhythmically against the cutting board. Look, I know things got out of hand, he continued, attempting an apologetic sigh. I admit it, but we're family. We should be able to resolve this civilized. His words sounded rehearsed, too smooth, as if he had practiced them in front of a mirror, perfecting the performance. I am being civilized, I said, finally turning to look at him, my eyes unwavering. I gave you clear options. Pay rent and contribute equally to household expenses, or find another place to live. I don't see what's uncivilized about that. $800 is too much, he protested, his voice rising, a flash of his usual indignation breaking through his carefully constructed facade. You know we don't have that kind of money. $800 for a room in this part of New York is a bargain, Marcus, I replied firmly, an edge of steel in my voice. And if you don't have that money, then I suggest you adjust your expenses. Cancel the streaming services, sell the giant television, stop eating out at expensive restaurants like I had to do for years when Arthur and I were paying off this house. Marcus clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing once more. Ilara is very upset. She cries all the time. She says you're rejecting her, that you don't love her anymore. He tried to weaponize her pain, a familiar tactic. Those words cut through me like sharp knives, twisting in an old, familiar wound. But I held my ground. I love my daughter. I will always love her. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. It doesn't mean letting them use you until there's nothing left of you. She never meant to hurt you, Marcus insisted. But even he seemed not to fully believe his own words, his conviction wavering. Maybe not, I conceded, a flicker of my old empathy surfacing, quickly suppressed. Maybe they never stopped to think about what they were doing to me. But that doesn't change the fact that they did it. And now they have to live with the consequences. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. You're impossible. I don't know how Arthur put up with you all those years. And he stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me trembling with contained rage, my hands still gripping the knife, a dangerous symbol of my newfound resolve. That night, while I was in my room, immersed in a novel, I heard a soft, tentative knock on my door. Mum, it was Ilara's voice, small and broken, stripped of its usual bravado. Can I come in? I hesitated for a long moment, my heart doing a strange flutter. My motherly instinct was warring fiercely with my newly forged self-preservation. Come in, I finally said, my voice carefully neutral. Ilara entered and stood just inside the doorway, nervously wringing her hands. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale and drawn, without the mask of makeup she usually wore. For a fleeting moment, I saw the vulnerable girl she had once been, scared and uncertain, and my heart softened dangerously, threatening to betray my resolve. "What do you need?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady and neutral as possible. I wanted to apologize," she said, and genuine tears, not the manipulative kind, began to roll down her cheeks, leaving glistening tracks. "You're right about everything. Marcus and we took advantage of you. We used you, and I'm so sorry, Mum. I really am sorry." I wanted to believe her. God, how desperately I wanted to believe her, to embrace her and tell her everything would be all right. But there was something in the way she avoided my gaze, something in the tone of her voice that triggered a deep-seated doubt, a red flag I could no longer ignore. "Are you sorry because you recognized that it was wrong?" I asked gently, carefully, probing for true contrition. "Or are you sorry because now there are consequences?" Elara let out a small sob. "Does it matter? I'm saying I'm sorry, isn't that enough?" "No," I replied, and the word came out harder, more definitive than I had intended. "It's not enough. Because I've seen this pattern before, Elara, ever since you were a little girl. You did something wrong. You cried. You apologized. And everything went back to normal, with no real change, no real accountability. But this time, it can't be like that. This time, apologies are not enough." "Then what do you want from me?" Her voice rose, frustration and a hint of desperation replacing the feigned sadness. "What do I have to do for you to forgive me?" "I want you to change," I said simply, unequivocally. "I want Marcus to get a job. I want you to take responsibility for your debts. I want you to treat me like a person, not an ATM. And I want you, if you're going to live in my house, to contribute like responsible adults." Elara stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and a wounded pain. "You're asking too much. We can't do all that overnight." "I'm not asking you to do it overnight," I replied calmly, my voice steady. "You have until the end of the month. That's 3 weeks. Enough time for Marcus to find even a temporary job. Enough time for you to make a budget and decide if you can afford to stay here under my conditions." Elara looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and profound hurt. "And if we can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "would you really kick us out onto the street? Your own daughter." "If you can't afford $800 in rent here," I said, feeling my voice break, a crack in my carefully constructed resolve, "then you need to find a more affordable place, a small apartment, a room in a shared house. There are options, Elara. Just none of those options include living off my social security any longer." She stood there for a long, agonizing moment, looking at me as if I were a complete stranger, an alien presence in her mother's body. And I suppose, in a way, I was. I was yours no longer the submissive, self-sacrificing mother she had known. I was no longer the woman who swallowed pain and humiliation to keep the peace, to maintain the illusion of family harmony. "I don't recognize you," Elara finally said, her voice cold, flat, utterly devoid of emotion. "This isn't you. You're right," I replied, a quiet triumph in my tone. "This isn't the woman you turned into your servant. This is the woman I should have been from the beginning, the woman your father would have wanted me to be." Elara left the room without saying anything else, closing the door harder than strictly necessary, the thud echoing the finality of her departure. I sat on my bed, feeling the tears stream down my cheeks once more. This was harder than I had ever imagined, much, much harder. But then I remembered the bank statements. I remembered the nights crying in silence while they laughed in the living room. I remembered every humiliation, every moment I felt invisible and useless, every dollar stolen. And I knew with a fierce certainty that I couldn't give up now. Not after coming so far, not after reclaiming so much of myself. The next morning, something entirely unexpected happened. The doorbell rang around 10 o'clock. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a beautiful young woman of about 25 with a warm, genuine smile that instantly disarmed me. For a moment, my grief-addled memory failed, and I didn't recognize her. "Grandma Ellie," she said, her voice melodic and familiar. And then, with a jolt, I remembered. Juliet Kane, my granddaughter, Ilara's daughter from an earlier, ill-fated relationship before Marcus. Juliet, who had gone to study in another city 5 years ago, and with whom I had slowly, regretfully lost touch, a casualty of Ilara's gatekeeping. Juliet? My heart just skipped a beat, a surge of pure, unadulterated joy mixed with confusion. "What are you doing here, darling? Can I come in?" she asked, looking cautiously inside the house, her bright eyes sweeping over the familiar living room with a hint of apprehension. I let her in, still confused but overwhelmingly happy to see her. We sat in the living room, a comfortable distance between us, and Juliet gently took my hands in hers, her touch warm and reassuring. "Grandma, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, her expression serious, her brow furrowed with concern. "And Mum can't know I'm here." My heart began beating faster, a drum of nervous anticipation. "What's wrong, dear?" Juliet took a deep, fortifying breath. "Grandma, I've been talking to Aunt Beatrice, your friend from the building where you lived before. My old friend, Beatrice Jenkins, whom I had unknowingly abandoned when I moved in with Ilara. She told me you haven't visited her in 3 years. She said she'd been calling and Mum always made excuses about your health, that you were too tired. I got worried and started to investigate." She paused, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow and concern. "Grandma, what has truly been happening to you?" And then, for the first time since everything began, since Arthur's death, I broke down. The floodgates opened, and the torrent of pain, humiliation, and quiet suffering poured out. I told Juliet everything, every agonizing detail, every casual slight, every dollar stolen, every moment I felt invisible. She listened in silence, squeezing my hands, and I saw her own eyes fill with tears, tears of empathy and outrage. "I knew something was wrong," she said when I finished, her voice thick with emotion. "Mum always made excuses when I asked about you. She said you were busy, you were tired, you didn't want to talk. But something didn't add up. She never connected me with you. It felt off." She looked me straight in the eyes, her gaze clear and unwavering. "Grandma, you can't stay here. It's not safe. It's not healthy for you." "Where would I go?" I asked, feeling the crushing weight of my age and vulnerability for the first time in days, the burden of my newfound courage temporarily waning. Juliet smiled, a bright, hopeful beam. "With me? Or back to your house? Or with Aunt Beatrice?" She said she would be absolutely delighted to have you, for as long as you need. You have options, Grandma. You are not trapped here. Her words were like a beacon of light in the deepening darkness, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone all this time. There were people who truly cared about me. Not my money, but me. Juliet's unexpected visit changed everything. For the first time in 3 long years, I felt like I had an ally, a champion, someone who saw me as a complex human being with feelings and rights, not merely a resource to be exploited. We spent the entire morning talking, planning, rebuilding the fragile threads of the relationship that Ilara had systematically sabotaged with her endless excuses and manipulative lies. "Mum always said you were too tired to have visitors," Juliet told me sadly, her voice laced with regret. "That your health was fragile, and you needed rest." I believed her, Grandma. I thought I was protecting you by not bothering you, by giving you space. "I was never too tired for you, my darling," I said, squeezing her hands, my voice thick with emotion. Ilara kept you away from me because she knew you would see what was truly happening. You were always more observant, more critical of her decisions than anyone else. Juliet nodded slowly, a dawning realization in her eyes. I always had my doubts about Marcus. From the day Mum introduced him, I didn't like something about him. The way he talked about money, about success, as if they were the only important things in life, the only measure of worth. She paused, her gaze distant. Do you know he asked me for money once, 2 years ago? $200 that he said he urgently needed for a business venture. I had just started working, and it was all I had saved. Did you give it to him? I asked, although I already knew the painful answer, the pattern all too familiar. Yes, she admitted shamefully, her cheeks flushing. And he never paid me back. When I gently reminded him months later, he got angry. He said I was selfish, that families should help each other without expecting anything in return. That's when I started to distance myself. I stopped coming around as often, and Mum did nothing to stop it, almost encouraged it. We were so absorbed in our raw, honest conversation that we didn't hear Ilara come down the stairs. Her voice, sharp and accusatory, startled both of us. Juliet, what are you doing here? Juliet stood up slowly, facing her mother, with an expression I had never seen before on her youthful face. It was one of profound disappointment mixed with a simmering, righteous anger. I came to see my grandmother, Mum. Something I should have done a long, long time ago. Ilara cautiously entered the living room, her eyes darting between us, a growing unease in her posture. I don't understand. I told you Grandma was fine. Why didn't you call me before you came? Because Aunt Beatrice told me some very interesting things, Juliet replied firmly, her voice steady despite the tension. About how Grandma hasn't visited her own house in 3 years. About how you stopped answering my calls when I asked about her. About how every time I wanted to come, you made excuses, put up barriers. Ilara's face paled, the colour draining from her cheeks. I was just protecting her. Your grandmother has been having a difficult time since Grandpa Arthur died. She needed space, she needed rest. Her words were a desperate, transparent attempt to cling to her narrative. She needed space, Juliet repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity, a sardonic edge to her tone. Or you needed no one to find out what you and Marcus were truly doing to her. What is that supposed to mean? Ilara's voice rose defensively, a brittle shield against the truth. It means I found out everything, Mum, Juliet stated, crossing her arms, her posture radiating unwavering resolve. Grandma told me about the money, about how you treated her, about how you turned her into your maid while systematically emptying her bank account. Ilara looked at me, her eyes full of betrayal, a horrifying reversal of roles. You told her. Why would you do that? To turn her against me? I didn't turn her against you, I replied wearily, my voice soft but firm. You did that yourself, Ilara, with your own actions. Juliet came here worried about me, and I simply told her the truth. Something I should have done a long, long time ago. Marcus appeared at that moment, still in his pajamas, his face puffy, even though it was nearly noon. What is all this fuss about? He asked irritably, rubbing his eyes. Then he saw Juliet, and his expression changed, a flicker of surprise and annoyance. Oh, you? Yes, me, Juliet said coldly, her gaze piercing. The family member you prefer to keep away. Now I understand why. Look, kid, Marcus began condescendingly, a dismissive wave of his hand. You don't understand the full situation here. Your grandmother is confused, mixing things up. Old age, you know. I am not confused, I interjected before Juliet could respond, my voice sharp with indignation. And I have all the bank statements to prove every single word I said. I got up, walked deliberately to my room, and returned with the neatly stacked copies I had saved. I handed them to Juliet. Read for yourself. Juliet took the papers, her hands steady, and began to review them. I watched her face, a canvas of changing emotions. I saw her eyes widen with each page, her jaw tighten, her hands begin to tremble slightly, a visible ripple of shock. When she finished, she looked up at her mother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. $60,000, she said, her voice a trembling whisper, laden with horror. In 3 years, Mum. How could you? She's your mother. She raised you alone after my biological father left. She worked 2 jobs to give you a good education. And this is how you repay her. You don't understand, Alara said, the tears starting to flow freely again, a fresh deluge. We had debts, problems. She wanted to help. She wanted to help. Or you manipulated her into giving you access to her money so you could live off her generosity. Juliet threw the papers onto the coffee table, the pages scattering. I saw the charges, Mum. Expensive restaurants, jewelry, exotic vacations, designer clothes, while Grandma was living in a room the size of a closet and wearing the same worn-out clothes from years ago. Marcus tried to intervene, his voice placating. Listen, Juliet. This is an adult family matter. You don't have to get involved in financially exploiting a vulnerable elderly woman is an adult matter. Juliet turned on him, her fury unleashed. Do you know what that's called legally? Elder abuse, Marcus. It's a crime. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I saw Ilara and Marcus exchange panicked, terrified glances. Juliet had said out loud what I had been too afraid to admit, even to myself. What they had done to me was not just immoral, it was illegal. No one is going to involve the police, Ilara said quickly, her voice a desperate plea. This is a family misunderstanding. We'll resolve it internally. How have you been resolving it so far? Juliet asked sarcastically, her eyes flashing with scorn. Grandma, come with me now. Pack your things. You're coming to my apartment. Juliet, Ilara protested, a new note of desperation entering her voice. You can't take her away like this. This is her house. Exactly, Juliet said, her voice ringing with clarity. It's her house, not yours. And I think it's time Grandma decided who stays and who goes. All eyes turned to me. It was the moment of truth, the final pivotal decision that would change everything. I could feel the crushing weight of 3 years of pain, humiliation, and forced silence pressing down on my shoulders, coalescing into this single, defining moment. Juliet is right, I finally said, my voice sounding stronger, clearer, more resolute than I had felt in years. This is my house, the house Arthur and I bought together, the house where we raised Ilara, and I think it's time for it to truly be my home again. Mum, Ilara whispered, her voice barely audible, a fractured sound. Please don't do this. You have until the end of the month, I continued, ignoring her desperate plea, my gaze steady. As I already told you, you can stay if you pay rent and start contributing equally, like responsible adults. Or you can find another place. But I will no longer be your source of income. Marcus took a step toward me, his fists clenched, his face a mask of rage. But Juliet immediately stepped between us, her stance firm and defiant. Don't even think about it, she said in a dangerously low voice, a quiet but potent threat. Touch her and I swear I'll call the police right now. I have your number already. Marcus backed away, but his gaze was full of unadulterated hatred, directed solely at me. This is your fault, he spat, his words dripping with venom. You brought this brat into our business. You destroyed this family. No, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. You destroyed this family, Marcus, when you decided I was worth more dead than alive. When you looked at me and saw only dollars instead of a person. When you turned my pain, my grief, into your opportunity to exploit. Ilara collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with anguish. Part of me, The old, ingrained mother wanted to comfort her, to hug her, as I had done thousands of times when she was a child. But another part, the new, stronger part that had awakened at the bank 2 weeks ago, held firm, unyielding. Juliet gently took my arm. "Come on, Grandma. Let's pack some of your things. You can stay with me this week while we decide the next steps." "I don't need to stay with you, darling," I said, surprising myself with the fierce conviction in my voice. "This is my house. If anyone has to leave, it's them." Juliet smiled, a proud, joyful light in her eyes. "That's right, Grandma Ellie." I looked at Ilara and Marcus one last time, their faces a mixture of disbelief, fear, and impotent rage. "You have 2 weeks," I said, my voice clear and authoritative, a quiet echo of my long-lost self. "Start looking for jobs, make a budget, decide if you can stay under my conditions, or pack your things and find another place. The decision is yours." I climbed the stairs with Juliet by my side, leaving behind Ilara's heart-wrenching sobs and Marcus's muffled curses. With every step I took, I felt the crushing weight of 3 years, the burden of their manipulation and my silent suffering drop from my shoulders, dissipating into the air. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if Ilara and I could ever truly repair our broken relationship. But for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was walking forward, purposefully, toward a future I could shape, instead of merely surviving, adrift and invisible. In my room, Juliet helped me organize my few belongings, her touch gentle and reassuring. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma," she said, while carefully folding my worn clothes. "I know this wasn't easy." "It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, darling," I admitted, a raw honesty in my voice. "But also the most necessary." 6 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my house, my real house, the one Arthur and I had built together, sipping my morning coffee, and watching the sunrise paint the sky with streaks of rose and gold. The garden, which had been shamefully neglected for 3 years, was now blooming again. I had replanted the roses Arthur loved so much, tending them with the same devotion he had, and every morning their sweet, familiar aroma reminded me that life, even after profound loss, could still be beautiful, could still blossom. Ilara and Marcus had left 2 weeks after my ultimatum. They hadn't paid rent. They hadn't genuinely looked for work, their commitment to change as flimsy as their promises. They simply packed their things in the middle of the night, their departure as stealthy as their arrival, and left without a word, without a backward glance. I found a crumpled note on the kitchen table the next morning. "I hope you're happy alone," it said, in Ilara's tight, angry handwriting. There was no signature, no farewell, just that single, bitter phrase, a final, poisoned dart. The first days after they left were strange, unsettlingly quiet. The house felt too silent, too big, echoing with ghosts of their presence. I would wake up in the pre-dawn hours, expecting to hear their voices, their heavy footsteps, even their familiar complaints. But slowly, imperceptibly, that oppressive silence transformed into a profound, soothing peace. I learned to savor my unhurried mornings, my solitary meals without criticism, my afternoons filled with quiet pursuits, free from their endless demands. Juliet came to visit me every weekend without fail. We cooked together, filling the kitchen with laughter and the aroma of home. We watched old movies, talked about everything and nothing. She told me about her burgeoning career as a graphic designer, about her dreams of opening her own studio someday. I, in turn, shared stories from my youth, tales of her grandparents, of the vibrant, full life I had lived before losing myself in the suffocating fog of grief. Our relationship, once fractured, was slowly, lovingly being rebuilt, brick by painstaking brick. Beatrice, my dear friend, also became an integral part of my life again. My kindred spirit, whom I had unknowingly abandoned when I moved in with Alara. She didn't hold a grudge. She welcomed me back into her life with open arms and tears in her eyes, a warm embrace that healed old wounds. "I missed you so much, Eleanor," she told me that first day I went to visit her at her apartment. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help. I didn't know how to ask for help either, B, I admitted, a painful truth. I had convinced myself that I deserved everything that was happening to me, that it was my sacred obligation to sacrifice myself for my daughter, for my family. Beatrice took my hands, her wise brown eyes filled with the quiet wisdom of her 73 years. "Sacrifice is not love when it comes at the expense of your own dignity, Rose. That's self-destruction." Her words resonated deep within me, a profound truth I was finally ready to accept. As the months passed, I began to rediscover who I was, beyond being a mother, beyond being a widow. I joined a book club at the neighborhood library, immersing myself in new worlds and lively discussions. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community center, awkwardly sketching landscapes and still lifes, finding a new avenue for creative expression. Small, simple things, perhaps, but they made me feel alive, vibrant, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My social security, those $1,500 monthly that used to disappear into others' accounts, were now mine to manage, to control. I paid my bills promptly, bought quality food, allowed myself small, delightful luxuries like new books or fresh flowers for the house. I even started saving. For the first time in 3 years, I had a growing financial cushion, a tangible symbol of my renewed independence. One day, 2 months after Ilara and Marcus left, I received a text from Ilara. It was brief, cold, devoid of any warmth. "I need you to loan me $5,000. It's an emergency." Not even a hello, not a question about how I was, just a bald demand disguised as a request. I replied, after thinking about it for an entire night, carefully crafting my words. "No, Ilara, I will not loan you money. If you have a real emergency, seek help from social services or friends. But my money is no longer available to you." Her response was instant and venomous. "I knew you were selfish. I wish Dad was alive to see what you've become." I blocked her number after reading that, not out of anger, but out of self-protection. Every message from her was a hook, trying to drag me back into the toxic, codependent pattern we had. Juliet hugged me tightly when I told her. "You did the right thing, Grandma. Mum needs to hit rock bottom before she can truly change. And you helping her just delays that process." "Do you think we can ever fix our relationship?" I asked her in a small voice, a flicker of my old pain resurfacing. Because despite everything, Ilara was still my daughter, my flesh and blood. Juliet thought about it for a moment, her brow furrowed in contemplation. "Maybe, but only if she truly recognizes what she did. Not just empty apologies because she needs something. A real, genuine recognition of the damage she caused. And that might take years, Grandma, or it might never happen. I learned to live with that uncertainty. Some days were harder than others. I would see mothers and daughters walking together in the park, laughing, sharing intimate moments, and feel a sharp pang of pain, a deep yearning for what might have been. I would hear Beatrice on the phone with her children, sharing their day, and wonder if I would ever have those easy, loving conversations with Ilara again. But then I would look around my house, truly mine now, filled with things I had chosen, reflecting my own taste. I would look at my bank account with its growing balance. I would look at the watercolor paintings I had created, imperfect, but made with love, a testament to my burgeoning creativity. And I knew, deep in my heart, that I had made the right decision. One glorious spring afternoon, while watering Arthur's roses, I heard a tentative knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Ilara standing on the step, She looked different, thinner, with deep circles under her eyes, without the perfect makeup she always wore. Her clothes were simple, worn, a stark contrast to the designer labels she once flaunted. "Hi, Mum," she said in a trembling voice, her eyes downcast. "Elara." My voice came out colder than I intended, an automatic defense mechanism, a wall erected against past hurts. Can I come in?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "I just want to talk. I promise I didn't come to ask for anything." Her eyes, when she finally raised them, were filled with genuine tears, so different from the manipulative tears I had seen before. These were tears of raw pain, of humility. I let her in, even though every instinct screamed at me to be cautious, to protect my newfound peace. We sat in the living room, a considerable unspoken space between us on the sofa. "Marcus and I separated," Elara began, looking at her hands, her voice barely audible. "2 months ago. It turned out he had more debts than I knew. Gambling debts. We lost the apartment we were renting. I'm living with a friend now. I got a second job. I'm trying to pay off everything we owe." I waited in silence, without offering solutions, without trying to fix her problems, a stark departure from my old self. "I didn't come to ask for money," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "I came to tell you that you were right about everything. I used you. I treated you horribly. I took advantage of your grief after Dad's death and turned you into something you weren't. I took away your dignity." The tears were rolling freely now, a testament to her genuine remorse. "And I'm sorry, Godmom, I'm so sorry. Why now?" I asked gently, my voice still guarded, but softened by her evident brokenness. "Why come and tell me this now?" "Because I hit rock bottom," she admitted, her voice raw. "Because I lost everything. Because I finally understood what I did to you when someone did the same thing to me." She looked up, her red-rimmed eyes meeting mine, a searing honesty in her gaze. "Marcus left me with nothing, Mum. Exactly like I left you. And when I felt used, discarded, invisible, I finally understood." We stayed in silence for a long, poignant moment. Part of me, the old, ingrained mother, wanted to hug her, forgive her immediately, go back to being her protective, all-sacrificing mother. But the wiser part, the one that had fought so hard to emerge, knew that true forgiveness required more than words, more than a moment of shared pain. It required real, sustained change. "I appreciate your apology," I finally said, my voice steady, imbued with quiet strength. "I really do, Elara. But apologies are only the beginning. I need to see real, lasting change. I need time to heal, time to trust again. I need to know that you won't look at me again as a solution to your problems, as a resource to be tapped." "I understand," she nodded, tears still streaming. "I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just wanted you to know that I finally get it, and that I'm going to work on being better. Not for you, but for me." We talked for 2 hours that day. It was painful, honest, raw, a difficult excavation of buried emotions and unspoken resentments. I told her how I had felt during those 3 years, the depth of my hurt, the sense of betrayal. She, in turn, told me about her own fears and weaknesses, the desperate need for external validation that had led her to justify her actions. We didn't end up as best friends, hugging and promising that everything was magically fixed, that the past was forgotten. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative, but hopeful beginning. When she left, I sat again on my terrace, holding my now cold coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky in a breathtaking symphony of orange and pink. Arthur's roses swayed gently in the evening breeze, their scent sweet and comforting. I didn't know if Alara and I would ever fully recover what we had lost. I didn't know if she would truly change, or if this was just another temporary pattern, another desperate attempt to regain what she once had. But I knew one thing for certain. I had changed. I had found my voice, my worth, my inherent right to exist as something more than a means to others' ends. It had taken me 69 years to learn that self-love is not selfishness, that setting boundaries is not cruelty, that saying no when necessary is an act of survival, not meanness. It was an act of profound self-respect. I looked at my reflection in the window, seeing a woman with honestly earned wrinkles, with silver hair that I no longer dyed to please others, with eyes that had cried oceans, but now shone with something new, something luminous. Freedom, Arthur, I whispered to the gentle wind, a soft confession. I finally did it. I finally stood up for myself. And somewhere in my most cherished memories, I could hear his loving voice telling me what he had always said, a comforting whisper from beyond the veil. I'm proud of you, my love. I walked into my house, into my home, closed the door behind me, and smiled. Because today, I didn't need anyone's permission to live. Today, I didn't have to apologize for existing. Today, I was simply Eleanor, and that was more than enough.